kidding. I'm not certified on video. But we are very pleased that she's willing to repeat and update her talk because she's got new information from her work at the Babcock Burial Ground.
Yep, Babcock.
So we will catch up on that, but I thank you, Barbara, for joining us
Suzanne.
again and bringing us the latest on Crazy Harry. Oh, yeah. What's your name?
Suzanne Madison.
Oh,
Suzanne Madison, yep. Well, thank you for coming. And I like talking about Harry, so it's not a problem at all. So, he's my neighbor. So, well, thank you for joining me today for my talk on Colonel Henry, Crazy Harry Babcock. I hope you enjoy it. I will present a lot of information, and if you do not hear all of it, it will be available to review later on. People often ask, if you could meet someone from the past, who would it be? My first answer is always, Benjamin, are you there? I didn't put it, you got it. It's okay without it on?
It'll be fine, but you can put that on your.
Okay, okay. Yeah.
He has a good pickup, so you can pick up Linda.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Where was I? So his accomplishments amaze me, and I wonder if this country would be the same without his genius. That's Dr. Benjamin Franklin. But there is someone close to me I would also appreciate the opportunity to pick his brain and get a first-hand view of the founding of this country.
You keep talking.
Okay. He lies in slumber all these years, my neighbor in the cemetery, Colonel Henry Babcock, or as he is sometimes referred to, Crazy Harry. I have researched his life for more than 15 years. Born here in this home, April 26, 1736, to the Honorable Joshua Babcock and Hannah Stanton Babcock, he lived his adult life in Pawcatuck. He managed to move around his world and leave his mark. When I began this journey with Harry, I was looking for my own family grave sites. I purchased the Stonington Graveyards, a guide from the Stonington Historical Society. I never intended to follow his footsteps, but dashing Colonel Henry rests in peace with his family inside of my front door. It is a small family plot at the end of Trumbull Street, which was once his farmland. I was amazed I knew nothing of my neighbor and his heroic deeds. When I later found he had served in the American Revolution, I contacted the Sons of the American Revolution. There is a flag placed on his grave each year. Even more amazing, I found his home, built in 1750, was still standing and lived in. I contacted Isaac Smith, and he sent me a picture of the house. I had the opportunity to see the basement of his home, and it remains in its original state. Besides his military service as a soldier in 2 wars, Henry was a farmer, the noblest of occupations, as stated by Benjamin Franklin in a letter to his father Joshua. Henry also served as a Stonington Town Selectman, a representative to the Connecticut General Assembly, a highway surveyor, and a lawyer. He was a proud British soldier fighting against the French, and within 17 years, a proud American patriot. He lived among the elite of his time and was not afraid to express his ideas to those with influence. Stiles, Amherst, Johnson, Franklin, Washington, Putnam, Trumbull, Cook, Hancock, Dean, Saltonstall are all names from the history books. Okay. Henry witnessed the birth of a nation, our nation, with a front row seat at Bunker Hill in Newport. His father and brothers have their own stories about the American Revolution. His determination to be known and heard did make some uneasy, especially those Tories of Newport in April of 1776. Driving off the HMS Scarborough from the Newport harbor did not sit well with the rum makers, merchants, and ship owners. Some of them petitioned that Colonel Babcock was insane after a night of drinking. He was arrested and relieved of duty. Newport remained a thriving British port for 3 years until our friends, the French Navy and militia, arrived. Maybe it was the liquor stored in lead carafes, or was it the lead bullet he received in battle and the mercury treatment used in those days to heal a wound that made him delusional at times. That touch of craziness also appeared in England. On being presented to the Queen, he kissed her on the cheek, stating that was the acceptable practice in America. It is no wonder Harry and Ben would know each other well. So well, in fact, that Henry named his first son after his father's good friend. There are letters in New York archives from the Ticonderoga expedition during the French and Indian War, and published Rhode Island committee meetings discussing his military appointments and mental state of mind during the Revolution. Connecticut archives and town records contain his government appointments as well as his appointment to the Committee of Correspondence and as a signer of the committee to open a Baptist church at Long Point, Stonington Borough. The National Archives list correspondence to and from General Washington. He is mentioned in many books, even as recently as 2014. Described as a daredevil, daring and dashing, known the world over as Crazy Harry Babcock, the Colonel wrote his own story. Today, I'll attempt to form a curious, interesting, and instructive work of his biography as suggested in Updike's history over 100 years ago. From 1738 to 1756, Joshua and Hannah would give Henry 8 siblings. Adam, Luke, Hannah, and Francis would all live to adult age. 4 others, Paul, Amelia, Sally, and Harriet, would die young. Henry entered Yale College at the age of 12, following his father's footsteps. Henry is there while construction has started on Connecticut Hall, now the oldest building at Yale and a National Historic Landmark. Joshua buys land in Pawcatuck along the river and builds the home Henry will one day occupy. Driving down Mechanic Street, past the row of pleasant houses and on past the thread mill along the bank of the Pawcatuck River, whose sides are bordered by houses and small farms, we come to a turn on the road which takes one up a long hill, upon the summit of which stands the historic Paul Babcock House, built about 1750. It commands a great view of country, river, and even out to the ocean. It looks scarcely like an old house, being so well preserved, built in the style of the mansion house, square, large and high, with a deep-throated chimney in the middle, the front door in the center, and large rooms on either side, while a fine row of elms are before the door. This according to Grace Wheeler in 1903. 1752, Henry graduates from Yale. Though graduating at the early age of 16, he excelled in scholarship and was a favorite student of his tutor, Ezra Stiles, the future president of Yale. He won the Berkeley Scholarship at graduation. Henry is admitted to the First Baptist Church of Boston. It's the 5th oldest Baptist church in the country. In 1775, it was used as a barrack and hospital by the British troops during the occupation. Henry sends a gift of a notebook and includes this letter to Ezra Stiles later that year. Dear Sir, I desire you would accept this book as a grateful acknowledgement of the many unmerited favors shown from you to me, and I humbly think I may with a good deal of propriety transcribe 4 lines of Lord Orre's. To thee, dear Stiles, these spotless leaves I send. Small is the present, but sincere the friend. Think not so poor a book below thy care, who knowest the price that those canst make it bear. From your sincere friend and obliged humble servant, Henry Babcock. 1755, Henry enters the military. At age 19, he was appointed captain of a company, and one of the regiments raised by this colony marched to Albany and from thence to Lake George and joined the army in the campaign of 1756 to dislodge the French from Canada. Sir William Johnson, commander-in-chief, detached 400 men under Colonel Williams. Captain Babcock, with 60 men, constituted a part of the corps. They were attacked by the enemy and defeated. Colonel Williams was killed, and Captain Babcock had 19 men killed and wounded. Lake George, October 13th, 1755. A reporter, the scout of the west side of the lake, went out on the 10th instant with 50 men. We scouted the woods about 10 or 12 miles from the camp, discovered no enemy, returned to the camp the 13th. Henry Babcock, captain of the scout. 1756, Henry is promoted to major at age 20. Joseph Blackburn paints his portrait. The following letter of June 26, 1846, from Giles Babcock, Harry's grandson, describes the portrait. It is a full length, or rather 3/4, say, to the knees. It is taken in a court dress with a small sword, holding his chapeau in one hand. He must have been about 20 years of age, and was, I believe, at the time a captain in the army. It was painted either in Boston or London, most probably the latter. It bears the artist's mark, 1756, by J. Blackburn. It is a very handsome and striking picture, and even now the coloring is scarcely faded. It was also always considered a good likeness. In 1757, serving under Major General William Johnson, Henry, aged 21, is promoted to lieutenant colonel. The following year, at 22, he was promoted to colonel. Sir William Johnson was also the superintendent of Indian affairs for the British colonies. In 1758, July 8th, with Sir Geoffrey Amherst in command, Fort Ticonderoga is attacked. 110 of Henry's men are killed or wounded. Colonel Henry is shot in the knee. From Stonington, Nathaniel Ells sends Henry this letter dated 22 July. Surely we had strong correspondence both in the conduct and valor of our officers and soldiers, as well as fidelity, and was struck with no small astonishment and grief at the destruction of our brethren and the retreat of our army. How are the mighty fallen and the weapons of war perished? What shall we say when the sons of New England and their elder brethren of old do turn their backs before the enemy? For this we hang our hops upon the willow. We sigh and are in bitterness. Still we rejoice that you are not among the slain, and hope that your wound may be soon healed, that you may pursue the enemy and overtake them, and enter their strongholds and possessions in their confusion, and your honor and satisfaction. Your affectionate and humble servant, Nathaniel Ells. He was the pastor of the Congregational Church in Stonington, where he was a favorite, especially with young people. He was an ardent patriot and joined those that rushed to the defense of Boston in 1775. 1759, March 12th, the General Assembly of the Colony of Rhode Island appointed Colonel Henry Babcock to command their provincial regiment and all the other offices necessary, and as their men were detained in the service, we hear they will all be ready to march in 3 weeks at farthest for Albany, agreeable to General Amherst's orders. Colonel Babcock helped Lord Amherst take Fort Ticonderoga without a loss of life, commanding a regiment of 1,000 men. He served 5 campaigns in the French War. Henry received this emphatic testimony to his fidelity from General Amherst in a letter to Governor Hopkins. As Colonel Babcock has, throughout the whole campaign, continually manifested his great zeal for the public service, and upon all occasions promoted it to his utmost, I should not do him justice were I to omit giving him this testimony of it, and of begging you to return him my particular thanks for the same. 1761, Henry travels to England. On the night of his arrival, he attended a play at the Royal Garden Covent Theatre. There being no seat vacant, the colonel stood in a passageway. A policeman, seeing his tall, gaunt figure standing erect with a big slouched hat on his head, touched his shoulder with a baton and told him to be uncovered. Colonel Babcock thereupon took off his hat and, reaching up to a chandelier nearby, hung it over one of the lights. A murmur of disapproval ran through the hall, and the police were about to eject the rude intruder when someone present called out, "Colonel Harry Babcock." Upon this announcement, the performers in the play ceased acting their parts to join in the uproarious applause that greeted the presence of the far-famed hero, Crazy Harry Babcock. In 1761, a short time after this, Harry received an invitation to the palace and was introduced to the royal family. When the Queen, in accordance with usage, offered him her hand to kiss, the gallant colonel sprang from his knees to his feet, briskly exclaiming, "May it please your Majesty, in my country it is the custom to salute, not the hand, but the lips of a beautiful woman." And suiting the action to his words, he seized the Queen by the shoulders and impressed on her a loud and hearty smack on her lips, or cheeks, depending on the story. While in England, Henry trained at the Royal Arsenal in Woolwich. This was the home to the Royal Regiment of Artillery, and the Royal Military Academy, proving useful later on. He and his brother Luke met up with Dr. Benjamin Franklin and son William. Dr. Franklin wrote to Joshua about his sons. London, December 10th, 1761. Dear sir, I have been favored with yours by your valuable son, on whose promising worth I congratulate you and good Mrs. Babcock. I shall be glad to see them oftener than I do, but young men find in England amusements more agreeable than the company of old ones. The colonel is going down with my son to Bath, where I last night had the pleasure of hearing they were both well. Dr. Franklin goes on to talk about what's going on in Canada at the time. My best respects to you and yours. 1762, Henry returns to America. The heart of that daredevil, Colonel Harry Babcock, was perhaps never subdued by female charms but once. Roland Robinson, chancing to meet Colonel Babcock on Little Rest Hill, now Kingston, during a session of the court in February, asked the eccentric colonel to go home with him and stay the night. "Aha," said Crazy Harry, "so you want me to see Hannah, that I've heard so much of, do you? Well, I will go, but don't expect me to fall in love with her, as so many fools have done." As was the general custom in those days, they both rode on horseback, and when they came to McSparran Hill, one of the longest and probably steepest hills in Rhode Island, the ground being covered with ice at the time, Mr. Robinson cautioned his friend against the danger of descending on a smooth-shod horse, as he appeared to be, and advised him to dismount and lead his beast down the descent. Instead of heeding the well-meant caution, when they reached the brow of the hill, and Mr. Robinson was in the act of dismounting, Crazy Harry suddenly exclaimed, "Now, Mr. Robinson, I will show you how the devil rides." And putting spurs to his horse, he went slipping and sliding down the steep decline, fortunately without accident, on the full run. When they shortly after arrived at the house, the colonel was in high and outspoken glee at the prospect, as he said, of seeing the prettiest woman in Rhode Island. These words being spoken in a loud jocular tone just as they entered the door of the sitting room, where Miss Robinson was at the time engaged in sewing. With a slight flush in her cheeks and a look of surprise, she arose with her customary dignity and grace to receive her father and welcome his boisterous guest, whose eyes no sooner fell upon the beautiful vision than the rough-spoken hero seemed to have become suddenly overcome by some charm spell. As Miss Robinson, on being introduced by her father, extended toward him her hand, the crazy colonel reverently took it gently in his, and gazing in her face with a subdued look of wonder and admiration, he dropped on his knee before her, and with a voice tremulous with emotion, softly and slowly said, "Permit, dear madam, the lips that have kissed, unrebuked, those of the proudest queen of earth, to press for a moment the hand of an angel from heaven." The watchtower in South Kingston bears her name, Hannah Robinson. During the Revolution, the Marquis de Lafayette and Count Rochambeau stayed at this home. 1764. December 2nd, Henry and Mary Stanton wed. They moved into the home Joshua had built. 1765, in March, the British Parliament attempts to raise revenue to pay the costs of the Pontiac War and the French and Indian War, the Stamp Act, which is a tax on paper, newspapers, pamphlets, cards, almanacs, and dice. The Sons of Liberty formed to protest the Stamp Act. Henry's sister Frances marries Dudley Saltonstall, at her parents' home. Henry is elected selectman of the town of Stonington. His first child, Benjamin Franklin Babcock, is born, and his parents deed the house and land to Henry. 1766, Henry is elected representative for Stonington to the General Assembly of the Colony of Connecticut. That state house is no longer standing. The General Assembly met in New Haven in October and in Hartford for the May session. 1767, June 4th, Henry celebrates the king's birthday with a great dinner at his residence. The field piece is planted in his garden and responded to the toasts as they were drunk. To the king and queen, the Prince of Wales, the Duke of York, and all the royal family. The Army and Navy, Sir Geoffrey Amherst, Liberty and Property, Loyalty and Good Order, Dr. Benjamin Franklin, and many others. 1768, his second child, Paul, is born. The Townshend Acts are passed in Parliament in 1767, taxing goods imported to American colonies. It included china, glass, lead, paint, paper, and tea. The colonists did not have representation in Parliament. They acted by boycotting the British goods except necessities. British troops occupied Boston to enforce the acts. 1769, Henry is re-elected to the October General Assembly. Resolutions are passed supporting the city of Boston. Henry sends a letter from Stonington to the 9th of November to Thomas Brattle in Boston with the resolutions suggesting they be printed in the papers. The following resolution was passed by the lower house at this session. In the House of Representatives of the Colony of Connecticut, convened at New Haven, 2nd Thursday of October, George III, 1769. Resolved that this House do highly approve the conduct of the merchants of the Massachusetts Bay, Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania, and all other colonies who in this critical times have made so noble a stand to save the liberties of this country by refusing to import several British manufacturers until the revenue laws are repealed, thereby sacrificing their private fortunes to the cause of liberty, from such truly patriotic views as sought to transmit their memories with distinguished honor to the latest posterity, and ordered that the clerk of the House be directed to cause a copy of this resolve to be published in the several newspapers in the colony. William Williams, Clerk. 1770, Henry's third child, Dudley, is born. The city of Boston is occupied until the Boston Massacre. A British guard stood outside the custom house, was attacked, which led to reinforcements, and the colonists joined in. 5 colonists were killed and 6 wounded. John Adams defended the British soldiers. 1772, April, Franklin appoints Dr. Babcock as the first postmaster for Westerly. On June 10th, the HMS Gaspee is burned in Narragansett Bay, following British Parliament's attempt to control trade and induce taxation that was a threat to the commerce of Rhode Island. October 25th, Harry's 4th son, Joshua, was born. December 10th, Dr. Benjamin Franklin writes from London to Joshua and refers to his namesake, Harry's son, Benjamin Franklin Babcock. London, January 13th, 1772. Dear Sir, it was with great pleasure I learnt by Mr. Marchant that you and Mrs. Babcock and all your good family continue well and happy. I hope I shall find you all in the same state when I next come your way, and take shelter, as I often do, under your hospitable roof. The Colonel, I am told, continues an active and able farmer, the most honorable of all employments, in my opinion, as being the most useful in itself, and rendering the man most independent. My namesake, his son, will soon, I hope, be able to drive the plow for him. 1773, Hannah's only daughter, Hannah, is born. December 16th, the Boston Tea Party patrons, dressed as Indians, and dumped tea into Boston Harbor. The British closed the port to all shipping and shortly thereafter annulled the Massachusetts Charter. They also passed a bill providing for a trial in England of all persons engaged in the Tea Party, prompting the colonists to come to the aid of the Bostonians. In August, Henry writes a letter to Sir William Johnson with the idea of founding and endowing a seminary of useful learning amongst the 6 nations of Indians. He invites Johnson to visit. Could I promise myself the honor of seeing you at my house in Stonington, which though a coarse one you could find clean, I do not know anything that would be more flattering and pleasing to me. I would do my utmost to make it as agreeable as possible to you and the rest of the gentlemen. Your horses, I'm certain, would be as well commoded here as anywhere. I have plenty of corn and oats, much at their service. Henry admits in a letter to Miles Cooper on the subject of becoming a clergyman, he is totally abstaining from wine and spirits, finding that there is something in my constitution that at present will not bear it. November 19th, Sir Johnson did write back to Colonel Babcock. Sir, I have had the favor of your letter from Stonington, and I oblige to you for your kind inquiries about my health, which I think somewhat improved. There's no doubt from the letter you enclose me that the clergy at Boston would wish well to a design so laudable in speculation, but after giving it much attention, I am inclined to apprehend that there is more difficulty in in the execution than you seem aware of. Sir William Johnson would pass away the next year. 1774, July 11th, the voters of Stonington at a town meeting voted to support the Bostonians by opening a subscription for the relief of the inhabitants of the town of Boston. Henry is named to the Committee of Correspondence. September 5th, the First Continental Congress meets in Philadelphia. 1775, April 19th, the shot heard around the world at Lexington and Concord. Paul Revere and John Dawes ride on the night of the 18th to warn of the British plans to confiscate Arsenal in Concord and capture Sam Adams and John Hancock in Lexington. Two if by sea, the British came across the bay to Cambridge and marched to Concord. Colonists, 49 killed, 41 wounded, 5 missing. British, 73 killed, 174 wounded, 26 missing. The revolution had begun. June 17th, Bunker Hill. Henry is one of the first to enter Boston with Colonel Israel Putnam and volunteers at camp in Cambridge with him. December 1st, General Putnam recommends Henry for the Brigadier General position to General Washington. Sir, I shall esteem it as a particular favor if your Excellency will be so obliging as to recommend my worthy friend, Colonel Henry Babcock, to the Honorable Continental Congress to be appointed to the rank of Brigadier General in the Continental Army. I have been upon service with him several campaigns the last war, and I have seen him in action behave with great spirit and fortitude when he had the command of a regiment. He has this day been very serviceable and assisting me in quelling a mutiny and bringing back a number of deserters. Your Excellency well knows I am in great want of a Brigadier General in my division. In such a one as I can put confidence in and rely upon, I know of no man who will fill the vacancy with more honor than the gentleman named above. I have the honor to be, with great truth and regard, your Excellency's most obedient and most humble servant, Israel Putnam, Major General. Mutiny and desertion. The Connecticut troops wanted to go home when their enlistment expired, December 1st, even though they had been asked to stay to the end of the year. December 5th, Washington has Henry deliver papers to Governor Cook. 1776, January 6, Henry is given command of the Rhode Island Regiment. Both houses being joined in a great committee chose the following officers to wit for the regiment ordered at this session to be raised: Henry Babcock, Esquire Colonel, Christopher Lippett, Esquire Lieutenant Colonel. February 6, Henry to Governor Cook. Imagining it for the interest of the colony to march with part of Captain Joseph Stanton's company to Narragansett Ferry. He speaks of a man, Mr. Applin, who was conversing with the British Captain Wallace. I observed to him that it was high time for every man to choose his side, and for him to be so over-officious as twice to have a conference with Captain Wallace gave great reason to suspect that he was a dangerous person and not inimical to the liberties of America. Henry ordered them to stay upon Little Rest Hill till the governor's pleasure be known. February 26th, General West to Governor Cook. A dispute hath arisen between Colonel Richmond and Colonel Babcock concerning their rank in the brigade. Colonel Richmond says he was appointed colonel of the 1st Regiment and was second in command under General Hopkins, and that his rank is undoubtedly before Colonel Babcock. Colonel Babcock, on the contrary, says he had a colonel's commission many years ago in the last war, and for that reason, according to the established rules in all camps, his rank is certainly preferable to that of Colonel Richmond. This assembly, taking into consideration a letter from Brigadier General West respecting the dispute between Colonel Henry Babcock and Colonel William Richmond concerning rank, do resolve that by the rules of the Army, Colonel Babcock is entitled to take rank of Colonel Richmond in the colony's brigade, and that he do take rank accordingly. March 5th, Brigadier General West resigns to Colonel Babcock. The Brigadier General position is left vacant. March 12th, Governor Nicholas Cook to the Rhode Island delegates to at the Continental Congress last Friday. The Swan struck upon the flat rock near Blue Rocks, where she lay 4 or 5 hours. Colonel Henry got down 2 18-pounders, so which she might have been easily destroyed. But happening to have sent 2 officers with a flag on board, Captain Wallace, who lay at Hope Island, he did not think proper to make use of the opportunity. There being great uneasiness among the officers at Rhode Island, I have called the council together to take the state of the brigade and Colonel Babcock's conduct into consideration. I must strongly recommend it to you gentlemen to use your utmost influence to have the brigade immediately put upon the continental establishment, not only upon the principle of it being right that the defense of the colony should be a public charge, but as a measure essentially necessary for the internal peace and security of the colony. From this incident, Lieutenant Colonel Lippett signs a statement concerning Harry's conduct. He had stated he would consult his office and not go out to camp, which he had done. But that, I can assure you, Honor, that everything was done with the greatest dispatch, our cannon drawing down with men and oxen, and placed so as to do execution every shot. But unfortunate indeed, what we then had a flag of truce on board of Wallace's ship. The necessity of the flag going, I cannot say, as that I did not know of its going until after it was gone. But it so happened that while they were on board of Wallace's ship at the northeast part of Connecticut, the Swan got aground on the Blue Rocks by Coasters Harbor, and we prepared to receive her. Many people seemed desirous that we would not fire on the ship, as it would endanger the town of Newport. Colonel Babcock spoke to me about it, and I found that he was well as myself determined to fire the moment we heard our flag had got back. Therefore, the report of our being stopped by any designing people is not just, for had we our flag got back before the ship got off, I am sure we would have taken her and destroyed her. After the ship was off, our making ourselves a little memory at Esquire Dyer's I hope was not amiss, and if none of the officers had not been disaffected before, I believe all would have passed off as well as anything further that was happened since I had been down here. According to Ezra Stiles from his diary, we had just before sent a flag to carry Mrs. Bell on board Wallace's ship, up 8 miles at Hope Island. It was not returned, and it was against the law of flags to fire, and before the flag returned, the ship got off. She lay exceedingly convenient and could have been easily taken, but honor prevented. Colonel Richmond, with about 200 men, got over on Coasters Island Harbor within musket shot, and was such as their eagerness and impatience that without orders from Colonel Babcock, they burst forth into a fire of small arms almost incessantly for an hour, which cleared the decks and the cabin windows and sent them all below. About sunset, the tide carried her off. Coasters Island today is the base of operations for the U.S. Navy Newport Training Station and the U.S. Naval War College. So Henry's troubles continued from here. He has continued his command but given guidelines to follow, which include consulting his officers, not sending flags of truce to the enemy, that he does not impress horses unless necessary, and in his conduct toward his officers, he conformed himself to the regulations and articles established by the General Assembly. By the end of the month, Harry garrisons the troops on George Iris's farm. Governor Cook and the General Assembly order the removal of these troops. 10 years later, he will be reimbursed for defending this action, stating it was for the good of the colony. On the 19th of April, the New London Gazette reported on the evening of 11 April, 4 ships under the command of the Royal Navy entered Narragansett Bay. The warship Scarborough, with 20 guns, coming north from Georgia. Aboard that ship was the governor of Georgia, Sir James Wright, and other Tories, refugees bound for Boston, who had not heard of the evacuation. A smaller transport ship called the Scimitar with 16 guns, a brig and a sloop laden with goods captured along the coast. The locals decided to take back those prizes in their cargoes. Rhode Island had commissioned 2 row galleys, the Spitfire under Captain John Grimes and the Washington under Captain John Hires, powered by both sails and oars. They had top mobility within the bay. Hires' ship fired at the Scarborough, while Grimes boarded and sent off the brig and sloop. Then the battery at Brenton Point, under Babcock's command, fired on the Scarborough and forced her to move off. The newspaper declared this bold action of taking 2 vessels close under the stern of a 20-gun ship may possibly convince our enemies that the Yankees are not such dastards as the Tories in this country have represented them. The newspaper added this passage supplied by one who was present. We were bound in justice to say that the disposition on shore made by Colonel Babcock was very soldier-like, and notwithstanding his indisposition, he was on horseback great part of the night, fired one of the 18-pounders from the North Battery himself, and hulled the Scarborough, and behaved in so cool and composed manner as made even the Tories fear him. The Sons of Liberty take this opportunity of returning Colonel Babcock their particular thanks for the discipline he has established in the brigade under his command. Notwithstanding the clamor made against him of insanity, we think him perfectly in his sober senses. That dispatch from Newport concluded by saying, "Our bay is now free from pirates." And on 14 April, Colonel Babcock and Colonel William Richmond had joined their two regiments and marched into the town. April 14th, Colonel William Richmond wrote to Governor Cook that Babcock had reprimanded his officers and that he, Richmond, had sent Babcock to Providence because the peace of Newport and the troops had required it. A petition was sent to the Council of Wars concerning the conduct of Colonel Henry Babcock, that the late behavior of Colonel Henry Babcock, we are fully convinced that he is insane, and therefore the good of the common cause of America, the safety of the town, and the preservation of the officers and soldiers of the army, it is our opinion that it is your duty immediately to deprive him of the command, in which we will support you to the utmost of our power. We are, with respect, your most humble servants. This list of names include many Trinity Church members, merchants, ship owners, and run makers of Newport. Henry and his father respond to his arrest. Joshua sends Governor Cook his response to his son's arrest on April 18th and April 19th. He states, "Am under no small anxiety that the conduct of Colonel Babcock should subject him to your honor's censure and disapprobation. Joshua praises the troops for their unusual dispatch and have exerted themselves beyond example, causing the enemies to flee without their cables and anchors, and also mentions the George Irish incident when Henry stationed the troops on his land." The second letter states, "Unless he will entirely abstain from inebriating liquors, think it is best that he may be discontinued in service. If he cannot be got well, he cannot be fit to command. If he can, who is there fitter?" The date of Henry's letter is uncertain, but it must be after he was arrested and sent to Providence, about mid-April. Excerpts of that letter to Governor Cook. "Sir, it is needless for me to mention to ye honor the unparalleled abuse I have received from a set of ragamuffins enemies to the country. It is not surprising that the Tories of the town of Newport should have had influence enough to set me up to Providence. What has been my crime? The retaking of 3 valuable prizes, the driving 14 armed vessels out of the Tory harbor of Rhode Island, and fortifying the town of Newport? But the real and genuine Sons of Liberty will not call them crimes, but rather marks of superior skill and surprising activity, uncommon zeal and intrepidity. He proposes resigning if the General Assembly elects him to the Continental Congress." April 19th, the following is Dr. Stiles' entry on the subject in his diary. "Colonel Babcock carried under guard to Providence, accused of rigor to his officers. He is an excellent officer, well understands his duty in the military way, had been brought up in the service all the last war, but the poor gentleman is subject to lunatic frenzy, which for years past have been constitutional with him. This heightened into madness and distraction by drink, and though he takes great pains to refrain and keep himself from liquor, yet at times he loses self-government, and in these freaks behaves much out of character. He is otherwise extremely sensible and of true military spirit and fit for a general. He was the first man that set foot in Boston after the evacuation. He put his lieutenant colonel under guard for a misdemeanor and deferred the court-martial too long, upon which the governor and committee of safety at Providence sent for Colonel Babcock." April 23rd, Nicholas Cook to General Washington. Colonel Babcock has given such incontestable proofs of insanity that his officers were obliged to put him under arrest and sent him under a guard to Providence. The General Committee had continued the arrest and referred the matter until next week when the Assembly meets, who will certainly dismiss him. He also added, "I beg the favor of Your Excellency to represent the state of the colony to Congress and to recommend them that taking our brigade into Continental pay and to establish a force here for the defense of the colony." April 28th, General Washington responds to Governor Cook. "Colonel Babcock's misfortune is truly pitiable. The incontestable proofs which he had given at Cambridge, and since of a distempered mind, must to everyone acquainted with him show on how unfit he must be to command the forces of your colony." Yet Henry was in Cambridge with Washington, and the general had passed Putnam's recommendation to Congress for the brigadier general's position and gave him papers to bring to Cook. Later, Henry's father Joshua wrote to the governor, "Drinking anything strong is pernicious. Anxiety for the success of the service, added to a bad habit of body with sleepless nights, destroyed his flesh. He is a mere skeleton." Dr. Babcock said that he would oppose his son's having command in the army if he did not abstain from drinking. "I thank your honor," he concluded, "for suffering him to come home." May 1st. Oop, too far back. Okay. May 1st. Where it hath incontestably appeared to this assembly that Henry Babcock, Esquire, Colonel of a regiment in the service of this colony, is at times deprived of the perfect use of his reason, and thereby rendered unfit to command, it is voted and resolved that said Henry Babcock be, and he is thereby dismissed from the command of the said regiment, and the office is thereby declared vacant. May 6th, Providence, Nicholas Cook to General Washington. Your Excellency's favor in which you have assured me that you will recommend this unhappy colony to the Continental Congress have been laid before the General Assembly, to whom it gave great satisfaction. I enclose you a copy of Colonel Babcock's dismission. The office of Brigadier General is still kept vacant in hopes that the brigade will be put upon the Continental establishment and that a commander-in-chief will be appointed by Congress. I also enclose a copy of an act discharging the inhabitants of this colony from allegiance to the King of Great Britain, which was carried in the House of Deputies after debate, with but 6 dissonant voices, there being upwards of 60 members present. In a postscript, Cook adds, "By this day's post I have forwarded to Mr. Hopkins an instruction from the General Assembly directing him to make immediate application to Congress to put troops upon the Continental establishment." May 13th, Henry's wife Mary writes to John Palmer, "I want you to collect all of Mr. Babcock's things together and send them the first time Ben or Amos Pendleton come to Newport, and to get the trunk from Providence, and you must put the tea kettle in the bed, and then it won't break. Tell Duval he might pay you 30 shillings, and you pay yourself for your expenses when you carry the things to Newport. And if there's any left, you may send it in a letter to me. You must write me how you go on. Give my love to Sean Palmer and Nat Thompson and all the other Stonington lads. Tell Nat Palmer when he comes up he ought to come and see us. Tell Captain Stanton Mr. Babcock is very sick. Don't much expect his life hardly from one hour to another. This from your friend M. Babcock. Don't forget the soldiers' shirts or spits. Put that in the bed." This letter is a courtesy of the Mystic Seaport Archives. It may be pleurisy mentioned in a June entry that Henry is suffering from. His father also mentioned he was a mere skeleton previously. May 28th, Henry recovers from his illness and pens a letter to John Hancock, proposing to raise 2 battalions of Marines and would expect the rank of Brigadier General. Congress did not take up this proposal. The June session of the Rhode Island General Assembly. It is voted and resolved that Colonel Henry Babcock be, and he is hereby allowed 1 month's pay after the time he was dismissed from the command of the regiment in the service of this colony, during which time he was confined by the pleurisy with which he was seized while in service. July 2nd, as a member of the Committee of Correspondence and Inspection, Henry signs a request to the General Assembly for support of Stonington by the return of cannons lent to New London. July 4th, as a Declaration of Independence, is approved by the Continental Congress. August 27th, British occupy New York. Joshua Babcock, a member of the Rhode Island War Council, was in New York when the British captured the city. In his haste to leave the city, he lost his horse, but subsequently recovered from an American officer who had seized it. September 22nd, Nathan Hale is captured and hung as a spy. (1777) February 28th, Reverend Luke Babcock passed away. Henry's brother Luke was an Episcopal clergyman at Phillips Manor on the Hudson, where he died leaving a wife and several children. In historical notices of the missions of the Church of England, it says, "Another victim to ill treatment already mentioned was the Reverend Luke Babcock. Missionary at Phillipsburg, he was seized by the insurgents. His papers were examined, and because he answered affirmatively to the question whether he considered himself bound by his oath of allegiance to the king, he was deemed an enemy to the liberties of America and ordered to be kept in custody. After 4 months' confinement, his health gave way, and he was then dismissed with a written order to remove within the lines of the king's army and got home," said Mr. Seabury, "with difficulty and a raging fever and delirious, and there died. Indeed, I know not a more excellent man. I fear his loss, especially in that mission, will scarcely be made up." Luke graduated from Yale in 1755. He was appointed as the postmaster of New Haven in 1767. He gave up the post in 1769 and went to England to study for the ministry. 1778, Mrs. Hannah Stanton Babcock passes away while visiting her granddaughter Harriet, daughter of Luke. Ezra Stiles wrote, "A most excellent woman. The law of kindness was upon her tongue. Her prudence and amiableness of manners, as well as her virtues and love of all the religions, rendered her the ornament of her sex. Her husband accounted her his glory." 1780, May 28th, Dr. Babcock marries again to Anna Maxon. July 10th, Rochambeau arrived in Newport with 6,000 troops. July 24th, Henry sends warning to General Heath in Newport that General Clinton was embarking 10,000 troops to Rhode Island, that the English admiral had detached from his squadron 2 frigates to convoy the British troops through the Sound. A ship carrying Colonel Webb and his friends from Stonington had arrived first to give the warning. A quote taken from The Spies in Revolutionary Rhode Island by Christian McBurney in 2014. The message from the culp aspiring was not the second warning to arrive in Newport either. That honor went to Colonel Henry Babcock from Wesley, Rhode Island, who had in 1776 commanded a Rhode Island regiment, but had been sacked by the state's General Assembly. Babcock, it seems, had met the same man, C. Clark Pratt, who had recently arrived from Long Island at Stonington. After repeating the same intelligence, Babcock added that the person who brought me the above intelligence from Long Island is a young man of undoubted veracity and son to a member of the Assembly of New York State who fled from Long Island and lived a year without his family in my home at Stonington, and he may be relied upon. Babcock sent his children's tutor, a Mr. Whitman, to deliver the message. Babcock sent another message the next day after receiving a confirming report from another man who had just departed from Long Island and arrived at Stonington, as well as word from another gentleman who added that the British officers flatter themselves of entirely captivating both the fleet and the army of His Most Christian Majesty. September 23rd, Major John Andre, the British spy, is caught. September 25th, Benedict Arnold turned traitor. October 2nd, Major Andre is hung. October 24th, Henry writes to General Washington from Hartford, outlining a method of paying the army. Sir, I have had the honor of proposing to the General Assembly of Connecticut a method of paying the army with solid coin and furnishing magazines or provisions with the same currency, and not compel your excellency to distress the inhabitants of the Jerseys who have repeatedly sustained great injuries, both from the enemy as well as our army. Your letters upon the subject laid before the Assembly by Governor Trumbull gave pain to every human benevolent breast to hear them read. You are fully sensible that the enemy flatter themselves, that the rags with which our army are paid will prove our ruin. For you have convinced the world that the Continental Army are second to no troops on earth. Witness Princeton, Trenton, Monmouth, Saratoga, Stony Point, Camden, etc. I have the honor to be with sentiments of the highest respect and profoundest esteem, Your Excellency's most obedient and most humble servant, Henry Babcock. November 7th, General Washington replied to Henry from the headquarters, Passaic Falls. Sir, I have received your favor of the 24th of October, and have to observe on the subject that the plans suggested for paying and supplying the Army and prosecuting the war with vigor would undoubtedly be eligible if practical. How far this is or is not the case, I cannot take upon myself to determine. Adoption of the plans spoken of by you might give credit to the public virtue of this country at foreign courts that would be attended with important advantages to us. I am, Sir, General Washington. December 5th, Henry replies to General Washington's letter from Stonington. Sir, though early in life I had the honor of receiving answers to my letters from Sir William Johnson, Lord Loudon, Governors Hopkins, Pilkin, and Franklin, Generals Abercrombie, Lord Howe, and Lord Amherst, the present Commander-in-Chief of the troops of Great Britain, the great Dr. Franklin, who I ever thought took rank of the whole of the above gentlemen, though some of them, and indeed all of them, respectable characters. Yet my vanity never was more flattered than in the letter I was honored with yesterday from Your Excellency's headquarters, Passaic Falls, dated the 7th. Henry is again elected as a representative to the Connecticut General Assembly. Where am I here? July 27th, 1781, Henry's oldest son, Benjamin Franklin Babcock, dies at 16 years old as a result of a putrid fever. He served in the Penobscot Bay expedition under his uncle and commander Dudley Saltonstall on the frigate Warren, later taken prisoner and sent to the British prison ship HMS Jersey. The Connecticut Gazette, August 3rd, 1781. Died here on Friday last, Benjamin Franklin Babcock, son of Colonel Henry Babcock, of putrid fever occasioned by his confined on board of a prison ship in the harbor of New York, and fell victim to the lawless and more than savage tyranny of Great Britain. 1781, September. Benedict Arnold burns New London and is responsible for the massacre at Fort Griswold. October 19th, Cornwallis surrenders at Yorktown, the last major land battle of the Revolution. 1783, April 1st, the Honorable Joshua Babcock passes away. Patriot, Chief Justice, first Postmaster of Wesley, and Fellow of Brown University when he passed. In his will, he forgives Henry for any outstanding debt owed to him. His will named his other surviving children and grandchildren. September 3rd, the Treaty of Paris is signed by Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay at Versailles, formally ending the American Revolution. December 6th, Henry sends a letter to General Washington from headquarters Little Rest Goal and congratulates His Excellency upon the independency of our country. He explains he is in jail due to debts incurred during the war. To George Washington from Henry Babcock, December 17, 1783, headquarters Little Rest Jail. May it please Your Excellency, permit me to congratulate you upon the independency of your country, the conspicuous part Your Excellency has acted upon the great American drama in bringing about this important revolution, and will ever endear you to your country and many millions yet unborn, will rise up and call you blessed as the father and protector of your country, of the rights of humanity, in opposition to the formidable attempts of a haughty tyrant who vainly attempted to subjugate the Americans. That Your Excellency, both by your immortal pen and your glittering sword, taught the brave Americans, when liberty was the prize, to oppose those troops that but a few years before carried conquest in every quarter of the globe, commanded by the bravest generals that the island of Great Britain could boast of. That your excellency had address enough to keep the flame alive, though frequently without money and often without provisions, when sometimes it was just expiring. Your persevering through this long and arduous conflict would not be believed in future ages, were there not so many living testimonies to relate the glorious story, certified by many illustrious foreigners. Congress never did themselves more honor than when they begged the loan of your abilities to make a proper peace establishment. After you had won the prize at war and had landed your countrymen upon the broad basis of intendancy, upon which basis fair liberty smiles, commerce, and the polite arts, with honest industry supported by religion, will erect such a fabric that heaven itself will take pleasure in beholding. Long may you live to enjoy the endearing sweets of liberty and peace with Mrs. Washington, that honor to her sex whose joys will be redoubled by her consciousness of being so intimately allied to not only the greatest hero of the age, but the greatest philosopher and legislator of your country. I have the honor to be with every sentiment of the highest esteem, your Excellency's most obedient, most obliged, and most humble servant, Henry Babcock. 1784, Henry has unpaid property taxes. Announcement to be sold at public venue at the 10th day of January, next at the dwelling house of Captain Palmer of Stonington. So much of the real estate of Daniel Stanton Jr., Henry Babcock, and many others, lying in said Stonington, as will pay their respective state and town taxes in our hands, due and uncollected, with incident charges arising thereon. Stonington, November 15, 1784. 1786, Rhode Island General Assembly. Henry recoups his losses from the George Iris incident in 1776, when troops were occupying his property. Henry states it was for the good of the colony. It is voted and resolved that 20 pounds lawful money be allowed and paid out of the general treasury to Henry Babcock, Esquire, in full for his expenses and time and trouble in defending certain actions brought against him by George Irish, Esquire, for barracking troops on him and impressing his horses while he was commander of the troops in the service of the state. The said Henry Babcock, alleging his conduct in those respects originated from the necessity of the service, a regard to the conveniency of his troops and the service of his country. 1787, November 2nd, Henry's sister, Frances Babcock Saltonstall, passes away. Mrs. Saltonstall was an elegant and accomplished woman. There was a well-painted portrait, a good likeness of her, hanging in her father's south parlor chamber, which I trust has been preserved by some of her family. Her husband, Commodore Dudley Saltonstall, you will recollect as a matter of history, was a naval commander in the Penobscot expedition, which proved so disastrous that year. He passed away in 1796. 1790, the first United States federal census. Henry is listed as having 4 free white persons, male 16 and over, and 4 free white persons, female, for a total of 8 in his household in the county of New London, Connecticut. 1790, April 17th, Dr. Benjamin Franklin passed away. Lightning rods, bifocal glasses, Franklin stoves, fire company, U.S. Postmaster General, just to name a few firsts. Poor Richard's Almanac, Ocean Currents, Negotiations, Treaties, Diplomat, Printer. He's the only founding father to sign all 4 documents: the Declaration of Independence in 1776, the Treaty of Alliance with France in 1778, the Peace Treaty with Great Britain in 1783, and the U.S. Constitution in 1787. As I stated in the beginning, his accomplishments amaze me. 20,000 people attended his funeral in Philadelphia on April 20th. He is still with us today if you are lucky to have a Ben. 1794. Although the enclosed certificate was not identified, I'm sure, whatever it was, Henry was beaming with joy at receiving it. Washington's secretary sent this note with the certificate. Philadelphia, 14th, April 1794. Bartholomew Dandridge, Jr., to Henry Babcock. Sir, the President of the United States directs me to thank you for the tender of your service to your country, and agreeably to your request to return the certificate herewith enclosed. I am, sir, your obedient servant, B. Dandridge, Secretary to the President of the United States. 1796, December 17th. Henry's sister, beautiful Hannah Babcock Bors, passed away in Newport, Rhode Island. Husband John Bors passed away January 15th, 1815. Hannah Babcock was 16 when she posed for the British-born painter Joseph Blackburn. Blackburn imported a new charm into American portraits, witnessed by his decorative treatment of Hannah. The bright color notes of 3 blue bows led the viewer up through the expanses of her glistening off-white satin gown and marble-like skin to her gentle expression. Blackburn borrowed Hannah's pose, the style of her dress, and the peaceful park-like setting behind her from an English engraving. That's the two of them. That's her portrait, which now hangs here. Right? 1798, March. Captain Joshua Babcock dies at sea on a voyage from Havana to Hamburg. There's a tribute in memory of him in the Babcock family cemetery. 1799, January 15th. Dudley marries Nancy Ann Wright. They have 4 children. Anne passes away in 1866 and is buried in New York. 1799, December 14th. President George Washington passes away at age 67. The father of our country, Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, trained as a surveyor and then served in the French and Indian War. We are reminded every day of his service to our country. It is only right his face is on the $1 bill since he established the first national bank in 1791. 1800 federal census. Paul Babcock is living on his parents' farm. His family consists of 7 males and 5 females for a total of 12. 1800. October 7th. Colonel Crazy Harry Babcock passes on. 223 years later, he is still remembered. He is buried with many family members in the Babcock Cemetery on Trumbull Street. His wife Mary would survive him by 18 years, passing on 19 April 1818. The eulogies. Henry's son Paul. Colonel Babcock was a man of fine person, accomplished manners, a commanding voice, and an eloquent speaker. Wilkins Updike. Colonel Henry Babcock was a brilliant and extraordinary man, formed by nature and education to be the flower of his family and an ornament to the country which gave him birth. During England's wars with France in colonial times, Colonel Harry Babcock performed many marvelous feats of valor, both by land and sea, and in all his engagements and fights, he never once, it is said, succumbed to a foe. Babcock genealogy in Wesley and its witnesses. He is a real handsome fellow, debonair and quite the beau brummel known for men's fashions of his day. Liberally educated, accomplished in manners, and possessed unusual charm of personal preserve. The Honorable Elisha Potter. He heard Colonel Babcock in an address before the legislature on an application for liberty to raise a regiment in behalf of this state to assist the King of France at the commencement of the Revolution. As that monarch had been the friend of America when he drew tears from the eyes of the members, and that he never heard a more powerful or eloquent appeal, but the application failed. After 1800, Henry's 3 children who survived him. Paul inherits Henry's farm. He marries twice, first to Nancy Bell. She passed away in 1803, and then to her cousin Lucy Bell. She passed away in 1846. Paul passed away May 14, 1839. Paul's daughter Eliza married Captain Nathaniel Palmer of Stonington. Dudley, Paul, and Hannah inherit Joshua's home when his widow Anna passes away in 1812. They sell the property to Joseph Noyce in 1817. Dudley passed away July 28, 1850. Hannah married Joseph Phelps. He died in 1809, and she passed away November 2, 1842. They are buried together in the Stonington Cemetery. Paul and Dudley are buried in the Babcock Cemetery with their parents. Adam Babcock, Henry's only surviving sibling. He was a patriot and privateer during the Revolutionary War. Afterwards, he was a distinguished Boston merchant. He passed away there on 23 September 1817. His first wife, Abigail Smith, passed away December 17th. He married again to Martha Hubbard. She survived him and passed in 1838. Henry's signatures and portrait done later in life. Henry signs off. Thank you for your time and attention. I hope Harry will be pleased. These are my acknowledgments for all those people that helped me. And my comments are since a year ago, this history, presenting this history to everyone. Much work has been done by many individuals at the Babcock Cemetery in Pawcatuck. Besides clearing brush, picking up broken glass, and washing all the gravestones, several discoveries were made that led to media coverage in both local newspapers, The Sun and the Day, and Channel 3 News in Connecticut. Due to the diligent work of Michael Carroll, Director of Rediscovering History, Larry Hunter, Commissioner of the Rhode Island Advisory Commission on Historic Cemeteries, and the Stonington Historical Society and Cemetery Committee, the Babcock Cemetery has been restored. Henry's stone has been set upright again. His cousin, Captain Joshua Hazard's stone, was completely buried, as well as Henry's granddaughter, Nancy Babcock Palmer, and daughter-in-law, Lucy Bell Babcock. They were unearthed, repaired, and reset. A special thanks to Michael and Larry for taking time and caring so much. And that concludes my speech.